Hello for keys. Today I'm gonna show the theory in the Karpov variation of the Caro-Kann defense. Of course, this very famous variation is named after world chess champion Anatoly Karpov. So the Caro-Kann defense starts after the moves 24, controlling the center, and now black plays this crucial idea, pawn to c6, trying to play d5 and have sufficient control over the center. And now white usually plays the move d4, controlling as much central space as possible. d5 follows, and today we're gonna take a look at the move knight to c3, of course defending the e4 pawn, and once the trade happens, now black has many options, but the Karpov variation starts after the move knight to d7. Of course, the idea of black is to put either of the knights to f6 and play e6 and simply develops. Excuse me. And after this move knight to d7, white has many options. Either you can play knight to f3, you can play bishop c4, or you can follow the main lines with the move knight to g5. So knight to f3 is probably the most common moves of them all, although many people prefer to play knight to g5 in this position, but knight to f3 is one of the most logical moves. Of course, you are developing your knights, you have the control over the center, and you will develop with bishop c4 and you will castle. And in this position, of course, knight g to f6 has to be played, and after knight takes f6, this is the main move, but you can, after knight g to f6, you can play knight to g3 as well, and after e6, bishop d3 is the best move. Of course, this bishop often goes to d3, if not to c4. Of course, this h7 pawn can be attacked via the moves knight g5 and queen h5 once this knight moves from f6, and this h pawn is usually a target for white. So after bishop d3, c5 is played, of course targeting the d4 pawn, and after white castles, c takes d4 is the best, and after knight takes d4, bishop c5 is of course the normal developing move with a tempo, and after knight b3, attacking the bishop, now you don't retreat to b6 or to d6, the best move in the position is to play bishop e7, and after a rook e1 to simply castle. And now white is trying to play queen f3 and maybe put this knight on e4 and have attack on this h7 pawn. So queen f3 is the best, a5 is move that black almost always need to play, trying to play a4 and hit this b3 knight. So white simply develops with the move a4, not really develops, but stops any a4 ideas from black. And after the moves knight b6, this is kinda the end of the theory. Why now knight b6 has been played, of course gaining some control over the crucial d5 squares. White will try to play knight e4 and queen h3 attacking the h7 pawn, and will have decent position. So knight to f3 here is very good, but after the move knight g to f6, I recommend you to take the knight simply, and after knight takes f6, here you should play the move bishop c4 actually, and after bishop f5 developing, we simply castle in this position. And now black needs to develop his bishop, so e6 is forced, and after c3, just making sure our center is under control, bishop e7 has to be played, or bishop d6 is a possibility as well, but bishop to e7 is slightly better, and after rook e1, black simply castles. Now bishop g5 or h3 has to be played. Bishop g5 is an option as well, but after h3, this is the end of the theory. So after h3, well, black has this one move that needs to be played, which is c5, and this is the end of the theory. You can see that after we take the pawn, this is not good because queens get off the board. This pawn is defended by the e7 bishop, and black has perfectly solid position. So after the move here, after the move knight f6, now after knight takes f6, we just looked at the move bishop to c4, but there is one more option. You can play knight to e5, and now black has two choices. Either you play bishop e6, which looks kinda uncomfortable, but you will play g6, bishop g7, or you play this move knight to d7. And after knight d7, knight d3 has to be played. Of course, trading the knights is not really good, and after g6, c3 has to be played because bishop g7 will happen, and this bishop will be kinda binding on granite here, so c3 is very useful move. And after bishop g7, bishop f4, queen a5, developing the queen, putting some pressure maybe on the c3 pawn, and now of course threatening to take the d4 pawn. Why? Because the c3 pawn is pinned to the king. So we play the move queen to d2, unpinning ourselves, and now bishop d4 is no longer possible because queen is defended on d2. And after black simply castles, we play bishop e2, e5 is the best move for black, and you can see that after d takes d5, knight takes e5, and everything should get traded off. This is the end of the theory. Maybe bishop g3 or bishop g5 is preferred than to take the bishop, but of course this position is very good for black. He will put his rook on the open d file, will probably castle short, and this position is pretty balanced, and I think black has successfully equalized. So after the move knight takes f6 here, you shouldn't really play knight to e5. You should play either bishop c4 or the move pawn to c3 that we are going to take a look at it now. And after c3, bishop g4 has to be played, of course pinning the f3 knight to the queen. And after h3, bishop takes f3 is preferred than bishop h5, because this bishop will be kind of useless against these light square pawns, of course. And after queen takes f3, queen d5 has to be played, of course trying to get the trade of queens. But after bishop e2, e6, we simply castle, and after queen f3, bishop d6 is the best move. Bishop d2 is kind of the end of the theory. Black needs to decide whether or not to castle short or to castle long, and this position is pretty balanced as well. So if you're going to play the move knight to f3 on the 5th move of the game, I recommend you to take the knight and then to play bishop c4 on the 7th move of the game, putting some pressure on the weak f7 pawn. But of course, after knight to d7, we simply looked at the move knight to f3, all the variations of knight to f3, but there are two more options. Either you play after knight d7, you play knight to g5, which is the main move, or you play bishop to c4, which is a very aggressive option. Of course, bishop c4 kind of putting a lot of pressure on f7 pawn, and after knight g to f6, now knight g5 is the best move, simply threatening to take the f7 pawn, not only with a fork to the queen and the rook, but if we were to take with the bishop, that would be a deadly checkmate. So e6 has to be played, and now queen to e2 is simply preparing to maybe sacrifice on f7 or on e6 in some positions. So knight to b6 is the only good move, of course defending the pawn on e6 and attacking the c4 bishop as well. So after bishop d3, putting this bishop on this long diagonal, attacking the h7 pawn in some positions, h6 has to be played, and after knight 5 to f3, I guess is the notation of this move, black simply plays c5, putting pressure on the d4 pawn, and after d takes d5, bishop takes d5, you can see white kinda lost control over the center. Of course, there are no pawns in the center of the board, and black has successfully equalized, but white has a great potential attack going on the king side. Of course, knight to e5 is the best move, attacking the f7 pawn, or at least threatening to take the pawn with some deadly attacks in the future. So knight b to d7 has to be played, trying to trade off these knights, but after knight g to f3, reinforcing the knight on e5, the best move is queen c7, putting pressure on the attacked e5 knight, and after we castle, black castles as well, and now bishop to f4 is the best move, of course making sure that this knight is sufficiently defended on e5. After bishop d6, rook f e1 has to be played, putting a lot of pressure on the semi-open e-file, and this knight is a very good piece on e5. So after knight to c5, rook 8 to d1 has to be played. Of course, we are not really worried about taking this d3 bishop because it is kinda useless. There is no target on h7 anymore, and this knight is perfectly placed on c5. So black does not choose to take our bishop from d3, but he plays b6, and now we save our bishop with the move bishop to b5. And this is actually the end of the theory in this variation. Of course, bishop b5 kind of prevents rook to e8, of course, but bishop b7 will be played with some good potential attacking chances for black. And I think this position is very good for black and for white. Actually, this knight is super strong, but this knight on c5 is strong as well. This bishop on b5 doesn't really know where he has to go. Maybe a4 or c3 will be played, and then maybe bishop c2 in some positions. And white has some potential attacking chances going on, maybe doubling up on the d file, and this is great position if you're black. And after knight to d7, I recommend you to play bishop to c4 or knight to f3, but there is a very good move with the move knight to g5, and this is the most played move on the highest level of chess actually. And after knight to g5, there is actually only one move, knight g to f6, of course, developing. And after bishop d3, e6 kinda has to be played. e6 is played in almost all of the Caro-Kanns, of course trying to develop and castles. This bishop usually develops to this long diagonal, not to g7, but of course g6 and bishop g7 is played oftenly as well. So now we play knight to f3, and after bishop d6, you can see black is ready to castle. We will castle as well, and this bishop is perfectly placed on this long diagonal. And after queen e2, h6 has to be played. We of course develop the queen, but there are no attacking possibilities with this knight takes e6 sacrifice, because after queen e7, the queens would just get traded off, and this is just down a piece position. So knight to e4 has to be played, and after knight takes e4, queen takes e4 is the best. And now black needs to make a decision. Either he will play knight to f6, or he will develop his queen to c7. So queen to c7 is the best move and the most popular move, but after knight to f6, we simply play queen e2, and after queen to c7, we play bishop d2, b6 has to be played, and after we castle long, bishop b7 has to be played. Indeed, and after knight e5, black castles as well, and after f4, king b8, king b1, c5, d takes c5, bishop takes c5, and rook h to f1. You can see this is the end of the theory. This is a very theoretical position. Bishop c3 will maybe be played, bishop b5 in some positions. And you can see that this e5 knight is very good piece, pressuring both f7 and d7 squares in some positions. But of course, after queen takes c4, queen to c7 is the best move, and after white castles, this is the main move. But queen to g4 after queen to c7 is possibility as well, of course attacking the g7 pawn. And after king to f8, of course black cannot castle, because after bishop h6, white is simply winning, because after g6 you can simply sacrifice the bishop for checkmate. So after the move king to f8, excuse me, where is it? King to f8, king to f8 here. So now white chooses to castle, and after c5, c3 has to be played, reinforcing the center. And after b6, rook to e1, bishop b7, you can see developing this bishop to this very long light square diagonal. And after h4, white is trying to play h5 and just kinda stop these pawns being on g7 and h6, and will have some attacking potentials. And after rook to d8, you can see this is the end of the theory actually. But of course, this was the sideline after remove queen to c7. The best move is to simply castle, and we simply retranspose to the previously covered variation with the move b6. And after b6, if white were to simply play the move like rook to e1, c5 would just retranspose to the previously covered variation, but queen to g4 is now a possibility. And now king f8 has to be played as well. And after b3, bishop b7, bishop b2, just developing this bishop to this long diagonal. Maybe d5 will be a pawn sacrifice that will need to be considered in the future. And after knight to f6, attacking the queen, of course, excuse me. Now queen h4 has to be played, of course the queen was attacked. And after knight to d5, centralizing this knight, now white has to play rook f to e1, this is the theory. And after knight f4, attacking the bishop, putting some pressure on the d3 bishop. Now knight e5 is the best move, kinda defending the bishop being on d3. So after g5, the queen is attacked once again, and after queen g4, rook g8 has to be played, and after queen f3, rook d8 is a very good move, putting this rook on the semi-open d file, pressuring the d4 pawn, of course. And after rook a to d1, we're putting the rook on the semi-open d file as well, of course defending the d4 pawn once again. After c5, bishop to e4 is the best move, of course the queen was attacked, and after bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, now f5 is very strong, of course pushing all the kingside pawns, creating some advancement of the kingside. So after queen to f3, bishop takes e5 is the best, and after d takes c5, king to f7 is the best move in the position. And this is the end of the theory. We are at the move 24, and this is the most playable variation of the Karpov defense. In the Caro-Kann defense, of course, black is simply connecting the rooks on d8 and on g8. Maybe we will take and play rook to d1, and this position is usually a draw, and it is a very balanced endgame. But of course this knight is maybe slightly better than this bishop, so black is slightly better in this position. So this was the theory in this Karpov variation of the Caro-Kann defense, and I recommend you, if you are white, to play something like knight to f3 on the 5th move, or bishop to c4 here, with a great potential attacking chances. But if you are black, you should be really playing this knight to d7 variation. This is really strong, and many players won't know how to react to this variation, so black usually stands a bit better out of the Karpov variation if they know what they are doing. So ladies and gentlemen, that was a video on the Karpov variation of the Caro-Kann defense, and if you want to level up your chess today, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and see you guys in another video. Bye!